recording. All right, so normally the session is going to be recorded, so if people lose some pieces here and there, they can rewatch it again. We're also going to experiment a little bit with your participation. I will try to ask you some questions during the presentation, and you should be able to just either raise your hand or just intervene by unmuting your microphone. But we'll see. Okay, in this part of the class, we will talk about multi-objective problems, what they are, and the techniques that are used to solve. So let's start. This is the outline, what we're going to look at. Like I said, multi-objective problems. What is a multi-objective problem? What is multi-objective optimization? We're going to see a few real-world examples for which I will need to share my screen because the videos don't really work on just on the slides that are uploaded to collaborate. Then we're going to spend a few moments talking about a multi-objective evolutionary algorithm that you're going to use also in the exercises. It's called NSGA2, a non-sorting genetic algorithm 2. And then we're briefly going to discuss other approaches and a relatively recent subject called the many objective optimization. But let's start from this. From a practical example, let's say that you need to buy a plane ticket. Of course, during the lockdown, maybe that's not an up-to-date example, but maybe it's going to be soon possible again. And of course, when you need to buy a ticket, you are taking into account, for example, the price of the ticket. You want it to be as low as possible. And you would like also to have a flight duration that is as short as possible, because of course maybe you can find a very cheap ticket that goes from well, I don't know, if you need to go from Paris to Turin in Italy, you might find a plane ticket that goes to Madrid and then goes back to Turin, but then you're going to spend I don't know, 10 hours on a plane just for a 2-hour trip. That would be a direct flight, so that's not acceptable. And of course, there's a part that is utopia. We would like to have the minimal possible price and the minimal possible flight duration, but this is often not possible because such tickets don't exist. What exists, however, is the several other compromises. You can go on Google Flights, or you can go on Skyscanner, or any other type of website that is showing you different types of tickets, and you will find many possible compromises. Let me try to experiment with this. For example, this one has a very low flight duration, but the price is really high. So you can imagine maybe it's a direct flight, takes 1 hour, but it costs, I don't know, 1,000 euros. And on the opposite side, you have, for example, this ticket here that is very cheap, but maybe that's the ticket that goes through Madrid, and then you actually spend 10 hours for well, this one could. The other one could take you there in 2. But let's focus on these 2 points. Actually, yeah, the animations are not appearing in the order that is yeah, I would like them to appear, but that's okay. So we focus on these 2 points, right? We have I and J. Of course, I wanted the part I and J are not comparable to appear later. For some reason, it's not. So, can you tell me why are they non-comparable? Like, why can't we tell which one is the best? You can intervene as you wish, raising your hand
we have to decide what is more important between having a low duration flight and a low ticket price.
Yes, exactly. But by the way, you can also intervene in French if you want to. If you want to intervene in English, that's great. But yes, basically, in order to tell which one is the best, we would need to give more importance to one of the 2 objectives with respect to the other, right? Because I as a the point I, the ticket I, as a lower ticket price but a higher flight duration, while J has the opposite, like the ticket price is slightly higher, but the flight duration is also smaller, so it's a little bit weird. But for example, let's take point I in particular. If we take just point I, so let me can we find a point that is clearly worse than I? One of the other points in white that is clearly worse.
N'importe quel point qui serait plus en haut et plus à droite que I.
Yes, exactly. In fact, basically, we can trace, for example, a couple of lines here, and all the points that are in this space that is going to be highlighted here are so-called dominated by I. This is called Pareto dominance, and we're going to see later why. But basically, domination means that this point is better for all the objective considered. So all the points that are in this orange space are worse than I with respect to both ticket price and flight duration. And of course, we can say the same for J, right? If we go back to J, we can easily find a group of points that is going to be different, that are dominated by J. So all the points that are in the green area are worse with respect to both ticket price and flight duration. And of course, we can look at the overlap. Like some of the points are dominated by I, some of the points are dominated by J. So the next question is, in this graph, and unfortunately, I don't want to go to the next slide because I'm afraid that that it will already give the answer. But if we look at these points, besides I and J, can we find other points that are not dominated by any other point? They might be harder to indicate on this graph because, as far as I know, you don't have any way of pointing to a specific point. But oh yeah, someone has. Yes, okay, you do have the possibility. Yes, okay, excellent. Yeah, splendid. So we can go to the next slide. You actually pointed out all these points. That's absolutely correct. And these points, basically, if we trace a line through all the points that are not dominated, we have what is so-called the Pareto front. The Pareto front basically is by definition, the set of points that are candidate solutions to our problem that are not dominated, which means that there is no other point which is better for all the objectives. There are some points that are better for some of the objectives. For example, if we take, I don't know, this point here, we can say that, oh, this point here is better for the flight duration, which is smaller, but it will be worse for the price. So it's better for one of the objectives, it's not better for all of them. And if we want to use a more proper definition, that is absolutely terrible for some reason. The preview was working well. I don't know why, but basically, this guy with the huge beard, or at least that he had a huge beard later in his life, is Vilfredo Pareto, an Italian economist. And he worked on many different kinds of problems, including multi-objective ones. And his definition of Pareto optimality was that basically, I don't know if it's readable, but we can say that a solution X is Pareto optimal if there is no other X prime. So that basically, if we consider FE, which is all the fitness or objectives in the problem, basically X prime is better or equal to X for all the possible I, so for all the objectives in the problem. And in the previous case, we looked at minimization, right? We were trying to minimize both objectives, so the lower was better. Here, we have an example of higher is better, so that's a possible maximization. And sometimes Pareto fronts can have very weird shapes, so you don't have to assume that they are just like the ones we've seen in the example. They can have any kind of shape, but the important thing is that they are always a set of solutions that are non-dominated. And the follow-up question could be, who cares? Meaning, why should we care about multi-objective problems? Well, in reality, many real-world problems are often multi-objective, meaning that if you want a plane ticket, we looked at the price, we looked at the flight duration, but there are also other possible objectives, like I would like to have a good seat, right? Something that is not close to the toilets, or like something like with some leg space and so on. I like certain airports. I don't want to go through another, like, I don't know, Heathrow or another airport. So I would like to go in some airports that I know are nice. For example, if you are producing some kind of good, you can take into account the energy consumption and the quality and the price and the speed that you are producing stuff at. And you will find that many of those objectives are conflicting, meaning that if you want to improve quality, you need to spend more energy, more time. It becomes the price gets higher, so it's tricky. And the same goes for distribution, like large-scale distribution of goods. You have speed. You, of course, want to send the goods as fast as possible, but you also don't want to spend a lot. You want to keep employees high and so on. So real world is multi-objective. And multi-objective optimization is significantly different from single objective optimization, because in single objective optimization, as we've seen, we are happy to find one best solution, right? We optimize bias, we optimize rastiging, we want to get as close as possible to zero in that case, because it was a minimization problem. But we are happy to find one good solution. For multi-objective optimization, having one solution is not enough, because you are not really taking into account all the possible compromises. So you want to have the Pareto front, right? That would be great, having the real Pareto front. However, that's really hard. And so in some cases, it might be impossible because the problem is too complicated. However, what you can do is to find as many non-dominated points as possible, right? You can try to find as many points that are not dominated by any other point, and those are candidate solutions, and you can find them, and you find them all, or you find a large number of them, and then you can pick the one that you like the best. Also, finding one point on the Pareto front is usually relatively easy, but finding many points is not. There are several techniques that come from single objective optimization. When people started moving from single to multi-objective optimization, they tried some clever tricks. They said, okay, well, we can assign some weights to each objective. We have a fitness function that is actually a weighted sum of all the possible objectives. And if we adjust the weights, we give more or less importance to some of the objectives. And by changing the weights, we basically end up in different parts of the Pareto front. There are other methods that try to find the Pareto front analytically, but they basically only work on some specific kinds of differential equations. And if you have models that are not differential equations, they don't work. And then you have multi-objective evolutionary computation. Multi-objective evolutionary computation is the state of the art. Like, at the moment, there is nothing better for multi-objective optimization. Also because evolutionary algorithms are particularly suited for this kind of applications, right? We already start with a population of solutions, which means lots of points, right? So it's easy to imagine that if we are able to spread these points on the Pareto front, it's very nice, because we are going to find multiple different compromises. And also, in general, evolutionary algorithms don't rely upon any knowledge of the fitness function. So it's so-called black box optimization, because you are optimizing something and you don't really need to know the details of what you're optimizing. You just need the thing that you're optimizing to give you some feedback in the form of a value or multiple values, the fitness function, and you can optimize. So they are relatively easy to to use even in situations where other algorithms are not. The general idea of multi-objective optimization is not very different from classical single objective optimization. You create a population, you evaluate the population, you then create the offspring, you find the Pareto front, so you find the set of individuals that are not dominated. Then you start, okay, and up to here, actually, there's nothing particularly different with respect to, well, the only exception is finding the Pareto front. However, we stumble upon an obstacle when we are trying to remove the individuals, right? Because removing individuals is not that straightforward. In a single objective problem, it's easy. You sort the individual by their fitness value, and then you start removing from the bottom. But here we have several objectives, right? So how can we tell whether an individual is better or worse than the other? Well, we've seen the notion of Pareto dominance, right? So we can use that. First, we find the Pareto front. Then we put the points that we find in the Pareto front aside, so those solutions we keep them to the side. Then we recompute the Pareto front, and we remove the second Pareto front, and then we keep going. And by doing that, we obtain a list of Pareto fronts of less and less quality. Basically, the quality is getting down at each iteration. And when we need to kill some individuals, to remove some individuals from the population, we can start from the worst fronts, right? From the ones that are clearly dominated by a lot of other fronts. But okay, this one again was supposed to contain an animation, and it doesn't, but that's okay. So in this case, if you have our initial Pareto front that you correctly located the last time, we can take it and remove it. Once we remove all this part, I don't know how to better, let's ignore it. Basically, if we decide to find the non-dominated points again, we stumble upon this orange Pareto front, right? That is still pretty good. It's dominating a lot of other points here, right? All these other points are dominated, but yeah, it's clearly worse than the red one. And then if we remove also that and we try to recompute the Pareto front, we stumble upon this yellow Pareto front that is still decent. And then we have these 2 points that are just garbage. So if we want to start removing individuals starting from the worst, we can start, for example, from this one, then from this one. And then we can start removing points that are in the yellow front and proceed forward. Let's look at a real-world example, influencing social networks. So let's say that you are a company and you would like to advertise some of your products in social networks like YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever. You might want to use influencers, right? People who have lots of followers. So every time they push out a video, they say, oh, this video is sponsored, for example, by Raid Shadow Legends or some other mobile game. And then everybody knows the name of your product. But then you want to choose them in order to spread your message as much as possible, right? You might start just from the ones who have the largest following. But if the following of two different influencers largely overlaps, so you have the same people that are following both. I don't know, let's say that you have the PewDiePie, which is the largest YouTube channel that works with gaming. Then there's, I don't know, Markiplier, it's another large channel. But you have that most of the people who subscribe to PewDiePie are also subscribed to Markiplier. And then you are like, okay, maybe I can just pick one between the two and I will reach most of that public. And of course, you want to spend as little as possible because, of course, you're a company, so you're trying to make some efficient market decisions. And this is a clearly multi-objective problem because you want to minimize the number of different influencers that you're going to pay. And on the other hand, you want to maximize the influence that you are going to obtain on the market. You want to reach as many people as possible. And of course, this can be stated easily into an optimization problem. Your genome, the candidate solution, is going to be a set of nodes taken from a graph that is representing a social network where you have some nodes and people and other nodes that are connected to them. So, for example, you have a graph representing YouTube, and you have a node representing PewDiePie, and you have lots of incoming graphs for that. I would like to make some examples for the French YouTube community, but I don't know it well enough. And basically, this is going to be a set of nodes, right? It could be a vector of integers of different size, where each integer is representing a different node that you want to influence, or it could be a string of bits that is just the length of all the possible nodes in the network. If the value corresponding to a given node is 1, you influence that node, you want to pay that influencer. If it's 0, you don't want to. And your fitness function is also easy to compute. You can simulate the spread of the influence in the network, and you want to minimize the number of the nodes that you're going to influence, of the people that you're going to pay to advertise your product. And here would be a video that was showing the progress of a multi-objective evolutionary algorithm on that, but I can try to actually run it. However, I need to share another application window, so I'm going to do that. And I hope that you are able to see it. So basically, what is this? This is the all the candidate solutions in blue are the candidate solutions of the multi-objective algorithm. On the y-axis, we have the number of nodes that are, or the number of influencers that you're going to pay. So here we have solutions where you influence almost 400, where you pay almost 400 influencers. Near 0, you have very few influencers paid. And on the other hand, you have a numerical evaluation that tells you the influence that you are getting for that particular solution. The higher it is, the better the influence. And this is the initial situation. The lines in green and yellow are 2 references that have been created using other optimization algorithms. And as you can see, over the course of the evaluation, so this is the course of the evolution, the multi-objective evolutionary algorithm is able to find Pareto fronts of higher and higher quality, right? And it's slowly overtaking the green line as the number of evaluations increase. And if we get to the end of the video, long story short, it is also able to find solutions that are better than the yellow ones. So let's go back to here. Okay, that was not it. So now I'm going back to this. And then I have to find the slide that I stopped on. So give me a second. All right. And you should be able to see, yes, okay, you should be able to see the other slides. Okay, another example that is less frivolous, maybe, it's more practical. It's ecosystem services, which is something that we work on at the French National Institute of Agriculture and Environment. The idea is that you want to optimize the use of land in agricultural regions. So you have a certain percentage of land that is assigned to each use. For example, on some land you are growing food for animals or some sort of cereals. In other patches of land you are growing crops like wheat or whatever that is for human consumption. And then you have the forests that are extremely useful because they perform carbon sequestration, and in these years of climate change, carbon sequestration is becoming more and more important. And of course, this is a multi-objective problem because depending on how you allocate the land, if you decide to give more room to animal food, to crops, or to forests, you are going to get different feedbacks from animal energy production. It tells you how much animals you are able to grow using that food. Crop production, which is the same for crops, and carbon sequestration, which is an estimation of how much carbon dioxide your forest is able to capture. And the genome in this case is more complicated because it's quite large. Your genome is representing the percentage of land that is assigned to each use, so animal food production, crop production, and carbon sequestration for each region. And just to give you an example, since we have data at the regional level, for the area that is known as Massif Central in France, there are around 1,500 variables, which is a lot. And these variables altogether represent the use of land for each petite région agricole, which is a unit of agricultural land that is used in France, on which you can act in order to assign different patches of land to different uses. And the fitness function in this case is using different models for animal energy production, for crop production, and for carbon sequestration. And each model, you give it the input of the percentage of land that has been assigned to the task, and it gives you a numerical evaluation of how well you're doing for each objective. And again, let me go to a video that unfortunately I cannot play on this slide. So share application screen, application window, this one. All right. So you should be able to see this one. The idea is that this time we have 3 objectives, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult to read, but we're going to try. And also, it's a maximization problem. You want to maximize, in this case, on the y-axis, you have the animal energy production. On the x-axis, you have the crop production. And this is the initial population, this blue cloud on the right. But you will see that it's slowly pushing forward, upwards and upwards, and it's trying to find a good Pareto front where there are points that are not dominated by other stuff. As you can see, the shape of this cloud of points is not just a line like it was at the end of the evolution for the previous example, because the problem is 3-dimensional in the space of the objectives. So you have a third objective, which is the carbon sequestration, that the algorithm is also optimizing, but here it is not visualized. And I try to visualize it in 3D, but it's very hard to read. We will see it later in another 2D plot. So that you have to imagine that there is a third dimension where the cloud is also pushing upwards, basically. But yeah, it keeps going and it keeps optimizing. In the next slide, we're going to see another projection of the same problem. So you have this time the carbon sequestration on the y-axis, and again the crop production on the x-axis. So in this case, you have to imagine that you are looking at the cloud of points in another 2-dimensional projection, starting from the 3-dimensional problem. And again, you can see that the algorithm is slowly finding a Pareto front towards the upper right corner. And the cloud, again, is a cloud and not exactly, the points are distributed in a cloud and not exactly in a line, because there's the third dimension, which is the animal energy production, that is also pushing there. And that were just a couple of examples of applications of multi-objective evolutionary computation. And let me go back to this slide that I stopped on, and we can proceed. All right. Now that we've seen the problem and we've seen a few practical applications, let's talk about the current, probably the best algorithm that we have for multi-objective evolutionary computation. This non-sorting genetic algorithm 2. Actually, multi-objective evolutionary computation was quite easy to implement, and several people actually managed to tackle the problem. The results were decent, but there was a huge issue. Is crowding. Crowding means that, yeah, you found at the end of your evolution, you found a lot of points on the Pareto front, right? They are non-dominated, they're really good. The problem is that they might be too close together on the Pareto front, which means that in the end, they represent very similar compromises. for example, there's only a minimal difference between this point here and this point there, right? They're almost the same. Vice versa, it would be really interesting to know something about the Pareto front here or here, right? In the parts that are empty. But the problem is that since in real world cases, we don't know where the Pareto front is because it's really hard to find analytically. The only thing we know of the Pareto front is where our points land at the end of the evolution. So if there are no points here, we don't know anything about this part of the Pareto front, and the same goes for this part. So ideally, we would like to have a situation like this one, with maybe the same number of points, but they're more evenly spread on the Pareto front. So for example, we might know that there are compromises here and here that might be interesting for the final user. So the main innovation of NSGA2 is that it found a clever way to push the points to be spread apart. And what it did is that, okay, we have the objectives, and that's nice. We have the fitness 1, fitness 2, we have the several objectives, and we're using them in order to select the points. But that's not enough. We're going to create an additional value that is going to be associated to each individual, and that value will allow us to discriminate between points that are non-comparable and ideally are on the same Pareto front. So let's take a look at the point in orange, right, and the point in green. These two are non-comparable because one is better for one objective, the second is better for the other objective. But from a human point of view, the orange individual is not very interesting because there are already two other points that are this one here and this one there that are very close. They represent compromises that are very similar between them. On the other hand, there might be a promising part here of the Pareto front that might be interesting to investigate, because in the end, yeah, we're going to find a lot of points on the Pareto front, but maybe a human, as far as we know, will just need to pick one as a final compromise to be used. And in order for the human to be as informed as possible, we need to give him as different solutions as we can. Like the solutions have to be really different between them. So we would like to push more in this direction of the Pareto front. And NSGA2 implements a clever idea called the crowding distance. And the crowding distance works like this. In order to compute the crowding distance for the orange point, you look at the two closest solutions in the objective space, and you basically draw a rectangle around it, and you evaluate the area of the rectangle. And then you do the same for the other point. What happens is, points that have a larger area, a larger crowding distance, are in parts of the Pareto front where they are more isolated. Like there are not a lot of other solutions that are nearby. So if we needed to choose at a certain point which point to, let's say, to promote, which point to select for reproduction or to not kill for during the final part of the removal of points, we want to give priority to the points that have a crowding distance that is bigger. And in this way, NSGA2 manages to spread the points kind of evenly on the Pareto front, or as even as possible. And of course, that's just a minor point, but if you have a solution that has no other solutions that are to its left or right, by definition, they have an infinite crowding distance, which means that they are always going to be preserved inside the population, and they will have a very large probability of being picked for reproduction when they create offspring. And this is like the gist, the essential part of NSGA2. It stands for a non-sorting genetic algorithm 2, because there was a first version that was not using crowding distance. We see a crowding distance on a surface. It's basically for two objectives is going to be an area. For 3 objectives is going to be a volume, and then for 4 or more objectives it's an hypervolume. But the idea doesn't change. The idea is always the same. You create a value that allows you to discriminate between points that are non-comparable. 2 and 3 objectives, it works really well. If you ever have a multi-objective problem to solve, use NSGA2. That's it's really good for 2 or 3 objectives. Perfect. The limitation of NSGA2 is that the more objectives you have, the less effective it becomes. This is due to some sort of mathematical limitation. If you imagine that you are increasing the number of objectives, the distance between 2 points in the objective space will become larger. However, more dimensions you add, the more the distances between all the points will become similar between each other. This is a mathematical effect. So one of the problems of NSGA2 is that around 10 objectives, or maybe slightly more, all the points that you have, all the candidate solutions have similar crowding distances, and the algorithm becomes unable to discriminate efficiently between them. And of course, this is research. So it's a relatively recent research topic. It's 5 years old, less than 5 years old, which is called many objective optimization. And the question of many objective optimization is, what can we do if we have 10 or more objectives? Can we modify NSGA2? Can we find other solutions to find a good Pareto frequency for 10 or more objectives? So far, there is no good answer. Some clever ideas going around. One is to perform dimensionality reduction. If you ever heard of principal component analysis, is a relatively established technique that is able to map from a large number of dimensions into a small number of dimensions, from, I don't know, 50 to 2. And the idea is to use NSGA2 after performing principal component analysis in the space of the objective. So you compute the crowding distance, for example, in 3 dimensions, after squashing the number of objectives from 50 to 3, aggregating them into in a clever way. Another solution that has been designed by the same guys who created NSGA2 is NSGA3, that says that it's going to use individuals as references in order to optimize. However, in my opinion, NSGA3 is still not mature yet. You can find some code on the internet, but it doesn't seem to work exceptionally well. Further research is needed in this area. Just to tell you, it's an ongoing process, and people are working on it. And by the way, this concludes the part on multi-objective evolutionary computation. The exercise that you will find, I will get into that in a minute. Basically, the next part of the class will be dividing you into groups, and then you will be able to work on the current set of exercises. If you haven't finished the previous set of exercises, you can work on it a little bit more if you want to. But before that, if you have any questions on the material, feel free to ask. We